Hi, everybody. Curiously, this story didn't happen in Guerrero, nor did it happen to me. This happened to my Aunt Rebecca when she went to live with her husband, my Uncle Omar, in a small village in the state of Oaxaca. From what my aunt told me, this happened a long time ago, around 1997, when she had just given birth to my cousin Jose, a baby just a few months old who was born around that time. In that little village of my uncle's, many things are told and witches are greatly believed in, but not the witches who do cleansings for you, but the ones who fly at night, the ones who remove their arms and legs to be lighter, but above all, the ones who take people away. It's about those witches that people believed in my uncle's village. My Aunt Rebecca says that even before her son was born, both she and my uncle had heard strange noises above the roof of their little house. Back then they had a little house with an old tin roof, and at night they could clearly see something walking on top, something like chicken footsteps, but too heavy to be a normal chicken. Hearing this, my uncle would go out with a machete in hand, shining a flashlight, but he never saw anything. He only felt a strange smell in the air, like burnt resin, a smell that didn't belong to the woods or the village animals. My aunt knew perfectly well what it meant, because around that time rumors were circulating in the village that witches descended from the hills in search of newborn babies, as they fed on their blood and left them as mere empty husks. As the matter was serious and they believed very much in these types of beliefs, they always took precautions to avoid any tragedy. Therefore, they placed scissors under the baby's bed. They placed holy water in the corners of the house and had a red shawl hanging in the window, all to protect their son. Even so, the fear never left their bodies, as they said that witches were always lurking. But as they say, no day is so far that it doesn't arrive, nor is a deadline that doesn't expire. One morning my uncle left early for work in the village, and my Aunt Rebecca stayed alone washing clothes in the patio. She took advantage of the fact that the baby was sleeping in a hammock inside the house to do her chores. It was around 10 inches the morning, and everything was very quiet, quieter than usual, she recalls. My aunt always says that the silence that day was much stranger, as if there were no birds, no dogs, nothing moving, and that's precisely what put her on alert, because she was starting to feel a strange unease, as her baby almost always cried from hunger. But that day he hadn't cried for a long time, which meant that something deep inside her, that intuition that only mothers have, pulled at her chest with great force and told her that something was wrong. At that moment my Aunt Rebecca dropped the clothes she was washing and ran into her house. But upon opening the door and seeing the hammock, she let out a scream she would never forget, along with her son, who, by the way, was completely purple and lying on the floor without strength. There was a huge turkey the size of a small donkey, more or less. The turkey had shiny black feathers, a long, curved beak, and eyes red like glowing embers. This horrible thing was pecking at the child's stomach, not to eat him, but to drink his blood. My aunt says that for a second she froze in horror, that she felt all the air leave her body. But as soon as she saw her son's sunken belly, she knew that if she didn't do something at that moment, her son would die. She doesn't remember how, but she grabbed a broomstick that was leaning against the wall and lunged at the turkey as if she were fearless. She herself says it wasn't her, that something pushed her, that it was pure motherly instinct or who knows what, but she hit the turkey so hard on its back that it shrieked like a small child. The turkey defended itself by pecking at my aunt, but she, even though she was getting hurt, didn't think about herself, only about her son, and continued hitting that horrible animal, which was the very... Then she hit it again and again until the thing spread its enormous wings and staggered out of the house, leaving a foul smell of burnt resin, the same aroma they had always smelled in the nights before. The turkey ran towards the woods, disappearing among the trees, and she didn't know anything more about it. That, of course, was nothing other than a witch who had descended from the hill to suck the child. With the turkey gone, my aunt didn't waste any time. She took the baby in her arms, who was barely breathing, wrapped him in a blanket, and ran out crying in a hurry towards the village doctor's house. When she arrived at the doctor's, he almost fell out of his chair, seeing the child so purple and without blood on his lips. My aunt could barely speak, but she managed to tell him that a witch in the form of a turkey had tried to kill her son. The doctor didn't say he believed it, but he also didn't say he didn't believe it. He just got to work because the child was very ill, and luckily he managed to save him some time later. Although he was so bad, she says her son was days without strength, days without color, like a fading ember. From that event on, my aunt never left her son alone for a single minute. My uncle placed crosses on all the doors, put garlic, placed many scissors under the beds, as he didn't know that witches could also descend from the village. Fortunately, from that day on, they never heard footsteps on the tin roof again. My aunt says that witch gave up on her son, but she didn't go far, because every time someone in the village had a baby, they say that smell of burnt resin reappeared among the houses, and no one doubted that it was a witch who descended to take the babies. That is why my family has never forgotten that year, the year 1997, when a turkey the size of a donkey was seconds away from taking my cousin, and if it weren't for my aunt's bravery, he would be buried today, and we would all be praying for him. I remind you that we have daily videos and live streams every Wednesday and Saturday night. Thank you very much for your support. We continue. Community, I don't know if you are familiar with this witch business, how much you know, or what kind of beliefs you have in relation to them. I am sure that although we all know what witches are, I can assure you that depending on each region, each town, even each country, they behave differently and act unequally. What I am sharing happened to my Uncle Fausto, and according to his account, this is a belief held in his village about these women called witches. The story is ugly, community, and I recommend discretion, but it is something that needs to be known. My Uncle Fausto lived for many years, almost his entire life, in a small village of which he is a native, which is in the state of Zacatecas. I didn't visit him much because we live in another state, and in fact, we don't get along much with that side of the family, and now you will know why. Well, this happened about 8 years ago, more or less. My uncle says that one night, near midnight, a young neighbor of his came running to knock on his door. At that hour, he was awake for reasons you were about to find out. The young man knocked several times on the wood until my uncle came out and calmly asked him what he was looking for so late. The young neighbor of my uncle told him urgently about something very important that was happening. "Don Fausto, come quickly, please. Your sister is screaming very badly. She is in her house, but it seems like they are doing something very bad to her, because the screaming she's doing isn't right. Come with me, because it seems like they have her like a pig at the slaughterhouse." My uncle, with that calmness he always had, didn't even get nervous, so he just replied to the young man, "I know, young man, I'm not deaf. I can hear her from here." And yes, for a good while now, horrible screams of a woman had been heard throughout the village, coming precisely from the house next door where my Uncle Fausto's older sister lived, the house of my Aunt Berenice. She had lived alone there for many years, and most people avoided her house and only sought her out when they wanted witchcraft work done. But anyway, when the young man saw my uncle's calm reaction, he was taken aback and asked why he wasn't going to see her. Why wasn't he doing something if he could hear her screaming and suffering? My uncle then sighed, adjusted his belt, and said something that made the young man's skin crawl. "I know why my sister is screaming, young man. She is tearing out her own tongue, and it's better that no one bothers her because no one can help her." When the young man heard this, his eyes widened like saucers, and he stammered, asking why she would do something like that. My uncle raised his voice and, with all calmness, said even more crude and ugly things. "Because my sister is a witch. She made a pact a long time ago and became a witch of the hill, but since she's old and very sick, she knows she'll die soon. That's why she's tearing out her tongue, so that when God asks her about her sins, she can't answer. Because without a tongue, she can't confess, and without confession, they can't punish her, or at least that's what is said among witches." The young man stepped back 2 paces, trembling with pure fear, because, without knowing it, he was perhaps hearing the oldest and most brutal story in the world about witches. After that, my uncle added something else. "Leave her, young man. Better go home and stay away from my sister's house, but I thank you for having worried about her. You are a good young man, I recognize that. Now go, it's late." After that, the young man said nothing more. He just ran back to his house as if a demon were chasing him. That night, my Uncle Fausto sat outside, watching his sister's house, and he saw that no one approached her, as no one in the village wanted to get involved in that matter. Everyone knew or suspected what was happening inside. The screams lasted for hours. They rose, they fell, becoming hoarser, wetter, as if she could no longer scream. At one point, near dawn, silence fell suddenly, a silence so profound that not even the dogs dared to bark. My uncle got up from his seat, crossed himself for the first time in a long time, and said, "It's over." She has torn out her tongue completely. When they went to look for my uncle's sister because the smell of blood and moisture began to seep out of the windows, they found her in her bed with her eyes wide open and her hands covered in dried blood. And yes, she no longer had a tongue. After that, the burial was very quiet. No one wanted to see her in the coffin. In fact, no one even wanted to touch her body more than necessary. My uncle insisted on burying her quickly, without long masses, without unnecessary prayers. Everything very simple. Some villagers watched from afar. Others closed their doors and windows so as not to bring anything that might have lingered near Aunt Berenice's house in her final days. In my uncle's village, it is said that when a witch is very old or sick and knows she will die soon, she tears out her tongue to avoid confessing her sins in the afterlife. According to what is told, they tear out their tongue in two ways. One is by biting with their own teeth, and the other is by using a blessed knife in reverse. I don't know what they mean by this because I never asked, and my grandfather never knew either. He just said the knife had to be heated red hot. And with that, well, you know what they did. I'm sharing this because, as I said at the beginning, I don't know what you know about witches, what beliefs you have about them. But there in my uncle's village, this is believed and it is said to be real, because the witches from that place are completely true and have very dark dealings. If you are enjoying the stories, I invite you to leave us a like and subscribe to this great paranormal family. We continue. Memo and audience, I don't know if you will believe what I am about to tell you, and I don't judge you, because in summary, this story is about the fact that I am the great-grandson of a witch, or rather, that my great-grandfather fell in love with a witch. But let's not waste any more time, and I'll tell you what my family talks about a lot from those years and why this story is so strange, so to speak. My great-grandfather, may he rest in peace, was named Victor. From what is said about him, because I never knew him, and given the time he lived, we don't even have photographs. It is said that my great-grandfather was a thin man with a serious gaze, with hands calloused from working hard in the fields, with short black hair, slightly tall, not much, but certainly with a very strong character. I was told that when my great-grandfather was young, back in the 1950s, when there wasn't even electricity on paved roads yet, in the village of Carrizal de San Marcos, a little ranch lost among the mountains and ravines, my great-grandfather lived through things no Christian would wish to experience. That village has always had the reputation of being witch territory. The old people said that the nights there sounded very different, as if the wind carried voices and shadows walked close to all the houses. Don Victor, my great-grandfather, from a very young age, began to notice that something always followed him everywhere, something that didn't follow anyone else, only him. At first it was noises on his roof, then scratches on his window, then footsteps around his room when he was trying to sleep. He said that the witches were circling him because, in his opinion, he was too tender, too young, too easy to be taken. That was a saying because by then my great-grandfather was about 15 years old, an age where, according to that time, one was already a man. On one occasion he recounted waking up with purple marks on his arms, like long fingers holding him very tightly for a long time. Thus, everyone on his ranch thought that sooner or later one of the witches would end up taking him because everything my great-grandfather experienced was the product of them, witches who were stalking him. So, one day, desperate, he went to visit Doña Matilde, a woman who lived at the end of the road, whom everyone said had a pact with something from the mountains and could heal or protect anyone who wished. According to my family, my great-grandfather went to ask her for protection from the witches. The bad witches want you, my son. They have been testing you, and when you least expect it one night, you will no longer wake up with us, was what that woman told him. Then she offered my little great-grandfather an amulet. It is often said that it was a necklace with a green stone in the center, round, about the size of a coin. The woman explained that as long as he wore this amulet, the bad witches could not come near him, and also that the same stone allowed him to recognize them, even if they were disguised, because many witches took human forms to approach men. My great-grandfather listened, and with fear in his bones, he paid her without asking twice, as he was tired of these things always following him. From that day on, he lived more peacefully, because at night they stopped scratching his window, and the shadows that stood in front of his door in his room also disappeared. But the most disturbing thing was the other part, because my great-grandfather began to see the witches, not the bad ones, because they didn't even approach him because of the amulet he had, but he could see the neutral witches, so to speak, and he always mentioned that they looked like old women. He could see them while others couldn't, and he said they were hunched figures with grayish skin and very large eyes who walked among the coffee fields or near the rivers. Despite being able to see them, he never wanted to cross paths with them and always preferred to keep his distance. But what no one expected is what came next. Years later, a young woman arrived in the village, a girl about 23 years old, pretty, with freckles, long, very black hair with bright eyes, named Ines. Everyone was surprised because in those little ranches forgotten by God, no one moved in without reason. It is said that she almost always walked alone in the streets, very gracefully, as if she had something hypnotic that attracted people. My little great-grandfather was enchanted as soon as he saw her, but when he approached her for the first time, the green stone of the amulet that hung around his neck became so hot, and he immediately knew that this woman was a witch. But not one of the old, deformed ones, but a young witch, a complete witch who didn't need disguises or tricks because her beauty was part of her nature. My great-grandfather confessed later that he hated her and loved her at the same time, something very strange, of course. His heart told him to stay away, but something stronger pushed him towards her, as if he were marked before birth, that my great-grandfather would end up marrying that woman, even though he knew she was truly a witch. No one in the family ever understood it. They said she was very kind, that she cooked very well, and that she took good care of the house, but that she had a strange gaze, as if she were always listening to something that others couldn't hear. In this way, they lived peacefully and had many children, and my grandfather was one of them. At first glance, it seemed like a normal family, but many people in the village murmured that my little great-grandmother Ines never aged like the others. Wrinkles didn't appear on her, she didn't get sick, she didn't get tired. And my little great-grandfather, although he tried to hide it, knew that the creature he was married to was not a woman like the rest of Carazal, she was a real witch. This is where everything gets strange and paranormal, community. I mean, if you haven't had a dose of something strange yet. Well, it is said that when my little great-grandfather died, his wife simply disappeared, because it is said that one morning she was no longer there and the door of the house was left open, and that necklace, the amulet that my grandfather had worn his whole life, also disappeared with her. The rumors grew like weeds because, even though all my great-aunts and uncles were grown and didn't live with them, they went in search of their mother, but they never found her. Some said that she left the village because she didn't age and had to hide before people noticed that, well, she was a witch. But others said something much worse, that my great-grandfather, knowing he was going to die, put the amulet on my little great-grandmother Ines, to drag her with him to the other side to trap her, to force her to accompany him in death. The truth is, no one knows if that is true or not. What is true is that my little great-grandmother Ines was indeed a witch, and I have that woman's blood. Do you believe in strangeness? You will believe after hearing this. I never thought I would end up carrying this story on my back, but every time I close my eyes, I see the red light coming out of Doña Tomas's shack there in the little town where I grew up, San Miguelito. The shack. This is a small place with dirt roads, old houses, and hills that look like black mirrors when night falls. I don't know if it's because in my state it has always been known that Mexican witches, the famous Leopuchis, were born here, and it is known that they have never left here, that they are still among us, among the same people who look normal. To this day, we all know that in those parts, things that are not human still walk, although many prefer not to talk about it. I was about 17 years old when all this happened, and although there were already rumors that Doña Tomasa was not an ordinary person, no one dared to confirm it. The woman, as far as I remember, lived alone, had no family, and almost never went out during the day. But at night, they heard things being moved inside her shack, old furniture being dragged or herbs being prepared that smelled like death. Some said she was a healer, others, very, very quietly, mentioned that she was a witch. Who knows, because no one knew for sure exactly what she was, but everyone avoided her. Unfortunately, at that time, my parents' house was right next to the woman's. And that's why I'm telling you all this, because I had to see some ugly things with that woman. Well, this happened to me a while ago, as I said, one early morning around midnight, when I heard dogs howling with a fear I had never heard before. They weren't barking, they were howling as if they saw something they shouldn't see. I looked out the window of my room, and that's when I saw it. From Doña Tomasa's shack, a red light like a flame had escaped from the interior, but it wasn't normal fire, because the light floated, it moved as if it were breathing, slowly rising and falling from the hills. When I saw that, I froze completely, as I had never seen anything like it. The light seemed to have a shape, as if it were folded over itself like a blanket, like a sheet that glowed. Curiosity got the better of me, so I left the house without making a sound and followed the light from a distance, feeling the cold of the early morning bite my skin, and the light moved slowly, almost dancing in the air. At one point it stopped very close to a clearing among the trees, a place where my grandfather said no one from the village should walk at night. There, I hid behind some rocks, trembling but unable to take my eyes off it. That's where I understood what I was seeing. The red light wasn't a flame, it was skin. Someone's human skin, folded like a blanket, floating in the air as if it had been hung out to breathe. At that moment, I put my hands to my mouth without screaming, because lying in the wet grass there was something horrible. A skinless body, thin, shiny, with exposed muscles and bulging veins like worms. It had enormous yellowish eyes that gleamed like fire. It was a human body, yes, but twisted, with small wings on its back and fingernails as long as needles. That's when I realized that thing was a Talauapucha, a real witch, one of those who remove their skin to fly among the hills and feed on animals or babies. The creature was crouched down, sucking the blood of an animal that was still breathing. I know because I heard the last whimpers of the poor animal, mixed with the wet sound of that thing eating it. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond, and at that moment I felt as if I had been smelled. The Alpuchi raised its head and fixed its gaze directly in my direction. I don't know how, but I felt like it saw me, although I'm not entirely sure. It was as if my soul had frozen inside. I stood up as quickly as I could, but when the creature took a step towards me, such a strong wind as a whirlwind blew, and the red skin floated away very quickly in the air. The Pach recoiled a bit, as if remembering something or as if afraid of something. I took advantage of that moment and ran as fast as I could, stumbling, crying without looking back. I don't remember getting home, where I locked myself in and prayed practically all night. The next morning, I remember the village was restless. A hen, a sheep, and a dog belonging to my family had been found dead, all without a drop of blood. When I passed by Doña Tomasa's shack, she was outside, sitting with a smile that chilled my blood. She was wearing a shawl, but her hands were damp, somewhat red, as if she had just washed her hands, but that red had not faded completely. I remember that woman looked me directly in the eyes and did so as if to say that she knew I had seen her, but that she wouldn't do anything to me, or at least that's how I interpreted it. Community. I know this sounds very strange and more like a made-up story, but I swear that here in Tlaxcala the Twelpuchis still exist, and these witches still roam everywhere, they still take people away, and they still eat the blood of the little ones. Good evening, family. My name is Carmelo, and I am 58 years old. For some time now, I have been following you in all your live streams and videos, but until now, Memo has not invested this story, which is something I witnessed at the time, and is the ugliest thing my eyes have ever seen. I have shared this story on other platforms, I won't lie, but it has never been told in a video, only in comments and forums, so I hope it can be told and narrated here. This story is quite old, as it happened around 1999. At that time, I was about 30 years old and living in a small village called San Bartolo Solatepec, a very small town in the state of Hidalgo. One of those places where everyone knows each other, where gossip spreads faster than the wind, and where, of course, like in many other villages, they talk about the damned witches. This story concerns the life of Doña Leonora, a woman who at that time would have been about 50 years old and who lived in a small house in the village. Doña Leonora was a thin woman with a very stern gaze, always dressed in black, who from a very young age was branded as a witch. But not the fairy tale witches, of course not, but the evil ones, the real ones, the ones who do black magic, the ones who meddle with very dark things, the ones who kill people. It was said that as a girl she had made a pact with an entity from the hill in exchange for the gift of magic, but in exchange for the power they had given her, the knowledge, and for becoming a true witch, she had promised to deliver the life of her first child. And not just anyhow, but it was agreed that she would deliver him with her own hands. Well, at least that Doña Leonora, despite her reputation, was not a bad person to people. She was quite normal if you saw her at first glance and didn't know who she was. Some time had passed since Doña Leonora made that pact with God knows who, and shortly after she became pregnant. Although the truth is, no one ever knew who the father was. She never married, never had a partner. So people started saying that this pregnancy was not normal, that it was the product of magic, or to be more grounded in reality, that perhaps someone had done her a favor and then disappeared. After months, a daughter was born, her daughter who, if I recall correctly, was named Reina, may she rest in peace. After her daughter's birth, something changed in Doña Leonora, because I saw her carrying that creature with a care that no one had ever seen in her before, because, unintentionally, she became too attached to her daughter, so much so that she was unable to fulfill the pact she had made, the one she had promised that entity, and fearing that something bad would happen to her daughter, she took measures. The girl did not stay long in the village, as Doña Leonora sent her far away with relatives who lived in Pachuca to hide her so that the promise of the pact would never be fulfilled. From then on, and with the passing of the years, Doña Leonora's health began to decline. She fell ill and wasted away little by little, until she was very ill, and it was all said to be punishment for not fulfilling her pact, for not delivering her daughter with her own hands. Her decline was so great that in March of the year 1999, Doña Leonora passed away. Her burial was very sad and brief. Few people attended. In fact, not even her daughter was there because she didn't know what had happened. The lady was buried in the village cemetery, and everyone thought that everything ended there, but believe me, community, it didn't. This is where the truly ugly part begins. 2 days after the lady's death, Leonora's daughter returned to the village. By then, she was a grown young woman and quite beautiful. I know this because I saw her in person. Eventually, the daughter had come to claim what belonged to her mother, what was hers, the house and all the things her mother had left behind. Young Reina stayed in her mother's house and was there for a few days, but about a week later, a horrible smell began to spread throughout the village, a smell like death, rotten, the same smell that strangely came from Leonora's house where her daughter was staying. As the smell was so strong, some neighbors went to see what was happening. They forced the door open, and what they found inside was simply a horrible scene. In the living room of the house, 2 bodies were lying there as if they had been fighting. One, the young woman, Leonora's daughter. Her body was already decomposing. She should have been lying there for 1 or 2 days. Doctors later said she died of asphyxiation, that someone had strangled her until she could no longer breathe. And that made perfect sense because right next to Reina's body was Leonora's body, her mother's. A body even more decomposed, with dirt stuck in her hair, with dirty eyes and a face of pure terror. But that was impossible. The lady had been buried 2 days before. Yet, there she was, her body with her hands around her daughter's neck. Upon checking the cemetery, it was indeed true. Doña Leonora's body was not in that place. She'd escaped from the cemetery. People didn't want to ask too many questions because that was simply magic. Black magic. God knows, and I cross myself every time I say this. Who knows what possessed Doña Leonora's inert body for her to escape the cemetery and, as a corpse, end up strangling Reina with her own hands. Thus, it became known that she was forced to return from the dead, only to fulfill the promise she had made many years ago to kill her own daughter and deliver her life, even though it was already late. Because, as they say, community, no day is so far that it doesn't arrive, nor is a deadline that doesn't expire, especially when you play with things you don't understand. If you are enjoying the stories, I invite you to leave us a like and subscribe to this great paranormal family. We continue. Good evening, Shar family. I send a big greeting to all and each one of you who listen to this program. My name is Gerardo, and like many of you, I can say that I come from a family that has experienced many bad things in the paranormal realm. What I am sharing is one of the stories, if not the strongest story, that my family has lived, and I hope you will take it with great discretion. My family is originally from a very small town in the Sierra de Zacatecas. The little town is called El Salitre, and it has nothing special about it as such. It is one of hundreds or thousands that exist throughout the country. In that little town a long time ago, when I wasn't even born yet, imagine my Aunt Gabriella lived there. At that time, my Aunt Gabriella was a woman of about 20 years old, very quiet, a homebody who had recently gotten together with her husband, my Uncle Mateo. Months later, they moved in together, and my aunt became pregnant with her first child. My uncles say they took care of him more than pure gold, not leaving him for a single second. But in that village, being careful was not enough, because one night when they finally fell asleep from exhaustion, something happened. They say they didn't hear anything. There were no screams or blows, nothing to alert them. At dawn, when my Aunt Gabriella got up to see her child, she found him dead, or worse than dead. His body was there, but empty, dry, as if something had sucked him from the inside, leaving only the skin stuck to the bones. The villagers quickly said it had been a witch, as it is known that, in that region, there are many stories about these things that live in the fields and only approach the villages when they are hungry and know there are children. That loss left them forever shattered, so much so that to this day they blame themselves for having fallen asleep. But I think it was inevitable to close their eyes after so much work in the field. Years passed in which my aunt didn't want to talk about the subject, let alone have another child, as they lived in fear, with anger, with that stored hatred that was only visible in their eyes. They said that if they had another baby, they wouldn't allow anyone or anything, not even fatigue or sleep, to take their child's life, so with time it happened, and my aunt became pregnant again. That second child arrived surrounded by prayers, amulets, open scissors under the pillow, crosses on all the doors, blessed branches hanging in the windows. Everything that the village said had to be done to protect a child from witches. But the most important thing was that they never slept at the same time. My aunt and my uncle took turns. One slept for a while the other stayed awake, sitting by the cradle with very strong coffee and wide-open eyes. Thus they spent months exhausted but firm, until one night around 2:30 inches the morning, they say. When it was my Aunt Gabriella's turn to watch, she heard something that froze her blood. She says she heard a noise like large, heavy wings circling the house. That, of course, was not normal, as it was not the hour for birds to fly, let alone to hear the flapping of something so large. She quickly woke up my uncle, and they went out to the patio to see what was happening. They say that something black and very large, about the size of an adult dog, was flying over the house, but it had no clear shape. It was like a twisted body with wings that didn't look like a bird's, making a horrible sound like a lament mixed with a growl, like a crow, more or less. At that instant, they knew what it was. That thing was a witch, one who had come again for the child. My aunt and uncle were already prepared in case it happened again, so without thinking twice they began to pray. They learned some prayers that were said at that time. They were to bring down evil things from the sky, to cast down witches, as many call them. My aunt and uncle recited those phrases with great faith, with some fear, of course, and with all the pain stored for years. As a result, that thing, that bird-like creature, began to falter in the air. It let out a terrifying shriek and then fell to the ground with a thud. When they approached to see what on earth they had brought down, what they saw, my aunt and uncle say, was not a bird. They say it was a woman of about 50 years old with very burnt, wrinkled, black skin like charcoal. But above all, they say she had no feet. Her legs ended in stumps, and she only had hands with which she dragged herself and tried to propel herself as if she wanted to fly again. They say she was screaming, cursing, and looking at them with great hatred. My Aunt Gabriella froze for a few seconds, but then something came over her as she remembered all the pain, all the rage for her first child, not knowing if it was the same witch who had taken him, but surely it was one of them. She took firewood, took fire, and between the two of them they burned her, right there. No one stopped them. No one even found out about it. My aunt and uncle say it was the perfect revenge. The witch burned for hours, about 5, more or less. The fire just wouldn't go out. It was as if that thing didn't want to die there, as it clung to life as best it could. But in the end, only ashes remained of that witch. From that night on, nothing more ever happened with that child or with any of my other cousins who were born later, as the witches knew that they could not enter that house, as there were a couple of people who knew how to bring them down. My Aunt Gabriella doesn't like to talk much about the subject because, in the end, it was revenge, and revenge is not good, but in that case, that time, their revenge was the best of all, and they ate it in the house, in their patio, and with complete calm. I remind you that we have daily videos and live streams every Wednesday and Saturday night. Thank you very much for your support. We continue. Hello, family. Before I start, let me introduce myself. My name is Valentina, and I live in Mexico City. The story I am sending you by email is partly a 100% real experience, and although I didn't see it directly, my brother Javier did, and he gave me permission to tell it. First of all, I tell you that my family and I have nothing to do with paranormal things. Of my family, I am the only one who listens to stories and follows channels of the genre, more for entertainment than for anything else. But as Memo rightly says, fear is everywhere, and in any job. To make a long story short, I share that this happened many years ago, around 2022, when we lived in an Infonavit building in the San Lorenzo Tasoco housing unit in Iztapalapa. For those who don't know what these buildings are like, I'm showing you a photo of the site on screen so you can get an idea of where everything happened. In these housing units, everyone knows each other, everyone knows who comes and goes, and that's why any strange thing doesn't take long to be noticed. Right in the same building where we lived at that time, but 2 apartments up, lived a woman named Fabiola. That woman was about 70 years old, more or less. She was thin, always well-groomed, with simple clothes and a very soft voice that made you feel at ease. For many years, she was a factory worker. She worked hard in factories, and thanks to that, she was able to buy her low-income apartment in the unit. Or at least that's what she told the neighbors every time someone sat down to chat with her. By then, as the lady was old, she made a living by doing cleansings, curing children of empacho, rubbing people when they were feeling off, as we say around here, things like that, home remedies, as they call it. And the truth is, she helped quite a bit, as she relieved more than one person of pain or discomfort and didn't charge much. That's why the neighbors liked and respected her, but there was also something very strange about her. I wouldn't know how to explain it well, but even though she was kind and never had a problem with anyone, she had a very uncomfortable gaze, as if she knew things about you that even you yourself didn't know. Sometimes she would smile at you and you would feel an inexplicable chill, but no one said anything because she didn't harm anyone. But that strange aura was always with her. Although the strangest thing of all was her strange Friday custom. Every Friday, without fail, she would go up to the building's rooftop around 1 a.m. Not at 11, not at 12, not at 2, always at 1 a.m. The neighbors already knew this, and some even heard her footsteps on the stairs when she was going up to the highest part. When someone asked her why she went up so late, she would just say she liked to get some fresh air, that it was good for her lungs, for her body, so no one thought anything of it because, as I mentioned, she never had problems with any inhabitant. So people didn't suspect her at all. On the contrary, they saw it as a nice habit for the elderly lady. The night everything came to light was precisely a Friday. My brother Javier was returning from a party. He says he was drunk, not completely, but had had a few drinks. It was around 1 a.m. when he entered the building. He told me that just as he was going up the stairs, he heard footsteps a bit higher up, slow, familiar footsteps, and when he looked up, he saw it was Doña Fabiola, going up as always towards the rooftop with a strange calmness, as if nothing else in the world existed at that moment. Javier was always very curious, and that night, between the alcohol and intrigue, he decided to follow her to see what she was doing. He didn't make a sound, just climbed slowly against the wall, being careful not to be seen. When he reached the rooftop door, where the water tanks and gas tanks for all the apartments are, he saw something that, well, you'd better listen. He says Doña Fabiola was not alone. In the middle of the rooftop, there was another person, a man apparently of the same age, but completely out of place, because this guy had horns on his head. Long, twisted horns that shone with the yellowish light of the bulb. Also, his legs were not human. They were 2 strong, dark bull's legs that ended in hooves that struck the cement floor. Javier froze completely, as he couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe properly. He even thought he was seeing things, that the alcohol was playing a trick on him, but no, it was completely real. If it was horrible to see the lady, with what he says was what happened next was even stranger. I don't know if it's terrifying or simply disturbing, but, well, listen. Javier says that Doña Fabiola approached that being with a smile that my brother had never seen before. Then they took each other's hands and started to dance. There, in the middle of the night, on the rooftop of the Infonavit building, they danced, a woman and as if it were a party. They twirled around as the wind blew strongly around the couple. I know it sounds like a cheap movie script, I know, Community, but my brother says that's how it happened, that he clearly saw how that woman, whom we ultimately think was a witch, was dancing with the... My brother came down from that place scared to death and told me almost immediately what he had seen. We stayed in that building for 6 more months until we moved because of my father's work. During all that time, the lady never did anything bad to us. On the contrary, she was always very kind to us. Although my brother says, and it's because he felt it, that every time the lady looked at him, her gaze was a bit different. It was as if she knew that he had seen her and that my brother knew her secret. However, she never did anything bad to him either. We believe that to this day, that woman still goes up to the rooftop every Friday to dance with that being, and we believe that because the lady looked quite young, quite full of life, and perhaps at some point she was a real witch, and she simply goes up to fulfill a pact, a vow she made with that being. I leave that completely up to you. Interpret it as you wish, community, since this was the story of the woman who danced on the rooftop with the... I didn't believe in witches until this happened to me. And not because I was incredulous, but because one believes that these things only happen to others, to people who believe in stories, to the old folks, and, with all due respect, to ignorant people. But when fear enters your house and sits next to you in bed, there is no way to deny it. All of this happened in a region of Guatemala called San Miguel Chicaj Verapaz, a place surrounded by green hills, very deep ravines, and small roads where the fog descends suddenly at night, and silence becomes your only companion if you are alone. At that time, I lived with my wife and our first child, who, Sniffle, was then a baby of a few months old, very small, fragile, the kind that still smells of milk and talcum powder. Our house was very simple, made of blocks with a cement floor and a tin roof. At night, it was very cold, and the wind beat against the tin as if someone were walking on it. Since our son was born, my wife and I hardly slept, not only due to the normal exhaustion of being parents, but because one night strange things began to be heard outside. It all started when we were both asleep, and at that moment we heard the baby crying. It was a very loud and desperate cry, somewhat different from what we had heard before. My wife got up quickly and went directly to the baby's bed, but the child was completely asleep, crying. We breathed a sigh of relief and thought we had simply imagined it, that it was the exhaustion that forced us to hear cries where there were none. So we went back to bed without paying further attention. A few minutes later, the crying was heard again, equally clear, but this time it came from under our bed. That's when our skin completely crawled. I slowly bent down, thinking something was underneath. I turned on a small flashlight I had in my hand and shone it under the bed, but when I did, I saw nothing, only darkness, dust, and an old box that we always kept stored there. Strangely, this repeated several times over several nights. That crying didn't always come from the crib. Sometimes it seemed to come from the walls, other times from the ceiling, sometimes from under the bed. But always when we checked on our son, he was completely asleep. My wife started to turn pale, to waste away considerably as if something were draining her energy, and the child also began to look very strange. My son stopped crying in the afternoons, and at night, he ate very little and always looked tired. A neighbor of ours, an elderly lady named Gladys, told us something that at the time we thought was just a joke. She told us to be very careful, that what was happening to our son was not normal at all, because it was said and told that there were witches in the nearby hills, and they always descended when they heard babies crying. She said that when a cry is heard in the house but the only child is asleep, it means someone is sucking their breath. She recommended we find a healer, someone who knew about these things, to prevent something bad from happening to our son. A few days later, we went to a man who lived a little further up our house, almost reaching the mountain. He listened to us calmly and then told us something that left us completely cold. He said that a witch was trying to switch our son, that she didn't want to take him away yet, but that she was already preparing him. He said that witch came at night, entered the house without opening the doors, and always hid under the bed to slowly suck the breath from our son, and that if we didn't do something one night, the child would simply disappear. The man gave us clear instructions. He told us not to sleep together that night, that one of us should preferably stay awake to prevent anything from entering, to put open scissors under the bed, salt, garlic, a blessed cross on the baby's bed, and never, ever leave the house alone. He also told us something that stayed with me and that I remember perfectly. If you hear the crying from under the bed, Don't pray silently, do it out loud. So we did. That night, it was my turn to watch. It was around 2 a.m. when the air became very heavy, as if someone had opened the door, but it was clearly closed. The baby was completely asleep, but suddenly that same crying started to be heard again. Crying, scream. This wasn't coming from the baby's bed, it was coming from under our bed, where my wife and I slept. My body filled with great fear because I knew that thing they had told us about had entered the house and would again start imitating our son's cries. I got up slowly, took a flashlight, and looked under the bed. At first, I saw nothing, but then I did manage to see something. It was a figure stuck to the floor, hunched over like an old woman, thin with long, dirty hair, but it was extremely small, like the size of a 10-year-old girl, but her entire body was that of an old woman. That witch had her mouth open, sucking the air as if she were sucking something invisible, and according to the sorcerer, what she was sucking was our son's body. The crying was coming from that witch, not from our son. So, knowing that that thing was doing something bad to him, I quickly took some holy water we had in the house and started to sprinkle it under the bed. I started praying with my wife and asking that thing to leave. The thing raised its head and looked directly at me. I remember it had no eyes and only had a kind of very black, pointed teeth and a dry, long tongue like a cow's. After we sprinkled it with holy water, that thing crawled out from under the bed, ran directly to the bedroom window, opened it, and flew off directly into the field. As that thing moved away, it was emitting a kind of smoke, because I believe the holy water was burning its flesh. I would like to say that this was the last time we saw that witch, but no. We saw her 3 more times when she tried to take our son, but fortunately she was never successful. It wasn't until my son was baptized and was about 7 years old that that thing finally left him alone. But to this day, I am completely sure that witches exist, and they are not as we imagine them. They are much more horrible. If you have any story you wish to share with this pleasant community, I invite you to send it either by email or on the Facebook page. I would be grateful if you would activate all notifications to stay up to date with the daily uploads. Thank you very much for letting me reach your ears.